Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to sew the blanket stitch onto your fabric. This is a simple embroidery or hand stitching technique that allows us to then come in and add beautiful crochet edgings, borders, and sleeves to our projects. So let's take a look at how to sew the blanket stitch. So the first thing you need to do is prepare your fabric. Now, to demonstrate with today, I'm using a simple dish towel. Dish towels are one of the most common things that people like to add crochet edgings to. And if you haven't done this before, it's a great practice project before you go ahead and use this technique to, say, add sleeves to a t-shirt that you've purchased. This way you can practice it and the risk is a little bit lower. So, if you're going to use worsted weight yarn to add your edging or border, typically you want your stitches, your blanket stitches, to be about a quarter of an inch apart. Now, I got very lucky, and this particular dish towel that I picked out has these little sewn white thread bits, these decorative edging, and these are about a quarter inch apart. So I'm going to be able to use these today as my guide. However, if you don't get quite so lucky with your fabric, you can simply take a ruler rather, like I've got right here, and use a piece of chalk, or they make specifically sewing markers that will then wash out when you go ahead and wash your item. And you can use that to mark out how often or how far apart rather you would like your stitches to be. Again, a quarter inch is considered about average for worsted weight yarns, so you can go up and down from there. And again, if this was for something like a finished item like a garment, I might go ahead and work up my crochet swatch ahead of time and measure out just how far apart I want those stitches to be. But for demonstration purposes today, we're going to just use these little white dots here as our spacers. The next thing you'll want to do is go ahead and cut your thread or embroidery floss or thin yarn or whatever it is you're using to make your blanket stitch. Here I'm going to be using some cotton floss. Now, the general rule of thumb is to cut it to be approximately 3 times longer than the entire border that you want to do. So if I was going all the way around this piece, I would want to lay out my thread all the way around it 3 times, or I suppose measure it and then measure my thread. For this purposes, I'm just going to cut a small measurable amount of yarn here, or rather embroidery floss. Again, we just want a little bit here right now to practice with. But if I were doing this whole thing, I would measure this out 3 times plus a little bit extra. It's never fun playing yarn chicken and coming up short. So we're going to need a knot in one end of our thread here. So I'm going to go ahead and put a knot in my thread. One little trick I like to do is stick my yarn needle, or hopefully a very sharp needle that you'll have for this project, right in that knot loop, as you can see right here, and then I'll just pull it a little bit closer to the edge so that I don't have to trim off too much excess thread here. That just helps me get it a little bit closer. And then I'm going to put a second knot in this. The weave of this dishcloth is a little bit looser than some other fabrics, so I want to double knot this one. If you've got a thinner fabric, something a little bit finer, you might not need to double knot your thread. You can see I'm just going to make sure that knot ends up right on top as much as possible on top of the other one, and that looks pretty good. So then, of course, I want to put the other end of the thread on my needle. So again, I've been practicing actually a little bit on this on this dishcloth here. I'll go ahead and reveal this was my practicing stitches just to make sure that I was ready to make this video. And so I know that this particular dishcloth, again, has a little bit of a looser weave, particularly where these decorative thread bits are. But you do want to make sure that you get a needle sharp enough to easily go through whatever fabric it is that you are sewing into. For this one, like I say, I can get away with a little bit more of a duller needle. You can see it's got a little bit of a point to it. But again, if you're using, especially if you're sewing onto a t-shirt sleeve or something like that, you may need a thinner, finer needle than what I've got here today. This one's just going to be a little bit easier for us to see. So now we're ready to start stitching. And you can go right to left or left to right. It really doesn't matter. It's just whatever direction you prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and move in the same direction that I typically stitch in. Again, totally up to you. You can go either direction. I'm going to go ahead and put up both right and left-handed videos for this. So if you'd like to work the opposite direction from what you see in this video, you can go ahead and watch the other video, and that will help give you a better idea. Now, I did manage to, in all that, drop my thread off my needle. Let's get that rethreaded. There we go. And now we are officially ready to get started. So what we want to do is we want to begin on the wrong side of the fabric. And You want to kind of take a moment and think about what you're making and what your goals are here. How far deep do you want to come in here? You want to, of course, stay lined up with your mark. I'm going to be using my little white dots here, so it's sort of picked for me. But if those weren't here, I might say, for instance, use this hem back here to help me hide that first knot there on our thread. So I want to come sort of under that hem a little bit and find my way to wherever my first mark would be. And for, of course, our dishcloth here, I'm going to say that's my first mark right there. There we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull that all the way through. And at this point, I'll make sure that my knot is strong enough to hold it there. So then I'm ready to officially start stitching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my yarn all the way right over the edge and bring my needle right back through that same spot. So take your time, especially with the little hem folded over right back there. It might need a moment to find that same spot. And it doesn't have to be, of course, exactly the same spot. We want it to be right by it. You can see that puts a full loop right over the edge of our fabric. So then what we want to do is we're going to bring our needle, and this is kind of the tricky part. We're going to bring it right under the front of this stitch, heading towards the outside of the fabric so that our thread, our yarn, whatever it is, sort of lands right back up here at the top of our fabric. Now, as you make your next few stitches, the tricky part is going to be not pulling so hard that this stitch collapses. So I like to actually make a very tiny little cheat right here. And this is where having an extra sharp needle will come in a little bit handy. And I'm just going to take the tiniest little stitch right here at the top of my fabric. Now, strictly speaking, this is not part of the blanket stitch, but I find this really just helps it anchor it down so much nicer. And of course, when you've added your crochet edging, that little cheat right there is going to get covered up by the crochet edging we add. So it's a little sneaky stitch there, totally optional. Try it with, try it without, but I find it really helps sort of anchor this whole row down as we're getting started. So with that done, now I'm ready for my next stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm once again going to bring my yarn from the back and I'm going to go right to that next mark. Conveniently, this manufacturer made it for me. There we go. Let's find our way through. Have to get just under that hem edge back there, so it takes just a moment. And now, as I bring this loop through, I'm going to very gently pull it, but before I pull it all the way through, I want to make sure to catch the loop of the thread itself in my fingers of my other hand. So as I pull down, before this pulls through all the way, I want to send my needle right through that loop so that it catches when I continue to pull it through. So now when I gently pull on through, just like so, don't pull too hard, just do a little bit at a time, like so, then you can see we end up with a loop right across the top edge of our fabric here. And it's that loop and a series of loops like it that we're going to crochet under when we add our crochet. So like I say, you want to just gently pull. If we pull too tight, the whole thing can squinch down. We just want it to sort of ride right along that edge. And it can take some practice to get that tension just where you want it to be. The great thing is you can just take your needle off and sort of unpick your stitches as you go. Now, let's go ahead and take some more of those stitches together. Once again, I'm going to come from behind and I'll just look for that next mark, whether I marked it with chalk or marker, or I'm using some detail of the fabric like I am here. And once again, because this is a dishcloth, I need to be careful to go under that hem edge there to get into my stitch. There we go. It was almost there. Really take your time with it. This is, this edge will show. It's a decorative stitch, the blanket stitch. So we really want to just take our time with it. Now you can see with all that fiddling, the previous stitch wanted to get off track a little bit. So I'm just going to take some time to sort and straighten that one out. There we go. And now I will grab onto that loop as I start pulling through for this one. And as it gets close, I will send the needle right through that loop itself from the front and then just gently pull until I get that next bit of blanket stitch there right across the top, like so. Let's do some more. Again, I'm going to come from behind through my fabric. I'm going to find my next mark. There we go. And I'm going to pull through a little bit of that stitch, but then I'm going to make sure to catch that loop at the top. This will help keep these lined up and get me prepared for this next one. Once it gets close, I'll send my needle right through that loop from the front and gently pull again until we have another loop right across the top. And that is essentially it. We just keep going across our fabric, adding our loops one at a time. Make sure that before you pull it all the way through, you catch that loop. If you forget, you can go back and loosen up the stitch. It's not the end of the world. There we are. But I always like to just take a moment to sort of space out and even out the previous few stitches before I pull the next one through. Don't forget to catch that loop. And there we go. That is about it. Now, on our little sample here, again, I just cut off a little short bit of yarn, so we're not going to get super far on this one. So let's go ahead and we'll add one more. You can see that one got pulled a little bit, so we want to straighten it out. There we go. It's a little fiddly, but once it's all set up, of course, and then you put the crochet stitches in it, they'll all hold in place. There we go. So let's go ahead and add one more. We're going to say we're just adding a little bit of a little detail to this cloth. That's all we want to add for this one. And this is our last stitch. Or maybe we've worked all the way across a tiny little washcloth. Find my way through that. Again, the hem on this really wants to get in the way when I put my stitch through, but it'll make the back look really nice. So it's always a good idea. Just take your time. There we go. We're in that stitch. So now, again, assuming this is my last one, I've made it all the way across here. I'm going to straighten out that top of the previous stitch so I can finish up this one. And then, of course, we are now ready to lock that down. We need this last stitch locked down. So what I like to do is just come now from the front, right back through that same space or as close to it as we can get. And I just pull down on that thread there. Again, take your time with it. Do it gently so we don't over pull. There we go. And there you have it. Now that last loop won't go anywhere. That one's nice and locked down. We can come back to the back of our fabric and tie this one off with a good knot in it, just like we normally would. And of course, we can try and hide that a little bit under our hem if we've got one. Just tie it really small if you don't have a hem to try and hide it under. Whatever works for you. But you can see on the back here, we've got a really nice clean look. And then we've got our loops right at the top of our fabric here. Both of our ends are really well anchored down. And now we can go ahead and add our crochet. So here I've got just a little bit of worsted weight cotton yarn, which is always a great choice if you're going to add something to a dishcloth, of course. And you can just go ahead and start stitching right into these loops. And while this itself is not part of the blanket stitch, I wanted to show you just how easy it is to go ahead and add those crochet bits. So now what we're looking for is that loop right along that top edge. And we can just go right into that first one with our hook. You can see that 1/4 inch spacing was just about right. Right now I've got an H hook and a worsted weight yarn. So I'm going to pull up a loop, go ahead and put a single crochet right in that top loop there of that first stitch rather. You can see it really is just the right size. We can now add our crochet stitches. Of course, these are single crochets, but it could be fancier stitches. You could skip one if that's, part of the stitch you're doing. Do shells, all sorts of really, really gorgeous things. And now, of course, with this technique, you can add edgings to your dishcloths, to your blankets, fleece blankets, and of course, you can add sleeves to a t-shirt or an extra bit of hem if you find a shirt that's a little too short. Really, the possibilities are endless. So I hope you'll try it out, adding the blanket stitch to pieces of fabric so that you can add an extra bit of crochet. And that's how to sew the blanket stitch. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.